Not since the days of the Dark Mama or Love Elfchily have moviegoers been treated to a release weekend featuring two banger movies. Barbenheimer has become somewhat of a cultural phenomenon over the past few months, becoming one of the biggest surges in interest for movies I've seen in quite a while. Is it because it features two phenomenal directors absolutely owning their craft, or because the difference in style and themes are so night and day that it's just too funny to pass up? Whatever the reason, we're celebrating the Martini Shot hitting 500 subscribers by doing two reviews, and yes, that means two cocktails all in one video. Grab a drink, grab some popcorn, and buckle up today on the Martini Shot. Hello and welcome to the Martini Shot, home of movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails. My name is Brandon, and we're going to kick this party off by covering Oppenheimer first. But first, we need a drink. Now, I went back and forth on whether or not a cocktail inspired by the guy who created the atomic bomb was in poor taste or not. It's not a great thing to draw inspiration from, seeing as it forever changed the art of war, probably for the worst. But it's also been decades, so maybe sentiment is softened now, but I don't know. I do have a quick drink I'm going to show you, but we just won't dwell on it for too long. This is the Trinity test. If you're familiar with bomb-style cocktails, you'll probably know where this is going. It involves taking a main liquid, typically a beer, and dropping some type of shot concoction into it. I've devised my own powerful spin on this style of drink that does require some careful implementation of fire, so as always, please be extra careful when handling flammable materials. Let's get testing. Alright, so ingredient-wise, this is a very simple cocktail to make. You're first going to be wanting to start with a beer. You're going to want something a little bit on the lighter side, either a lager or a pilsner should do. Then you're going to take a pint glass and fill it up about 3/4 of the way. And next we are going to build our shot, which is going to comprise of 3/4 parts Jägermeister, and then a small little float of overproof rum on top. And once you have that shot built, now it's time to light it on fire. Again, please take the necessary precautions before you do anything involving fire and alcohol. This stuff can get very dangerous, and you definitely want to take the precautions so you don't hurt yourself or anyone else around you. And now very carefully take that flaming shot and drop it into the glass of beer. There you go. Now you have the Trinity test. So the taste itself will differ based on which beer you're using, but for me, what I found is that the combination of the Jägermeister and the funk of that overproof rum kind of transforms the beer into something a little bit more toasty. There's almost kind of like a faint dessertiness to it, almost kind of like a toasted porter. You can definitely experiment with different types of beers, see what kind of different outcomes you get. But yeah, overall, this is a very simple cocktail to make. And because of its high alcohol content, because of the shot and the beer itself, you want to be very, very careful with one of these. Now that we have our drink, let's dive into the review of Oppenheimer. Christopher Nolan is regarded as one of the best directors working today, a man with a distinct style and approach to filmmaking that has resonated with various audiences ranging in tastes. Whether it be through big brain mind benders or grounded, gritty reimaginings of a comic book icon, Nolan has a track record that cannot be denied. I like to think of him as a concept director, someone whose films typically hinge on a complex idea while occasionally sacrificing a more human element in the story. This isn't always the case with his work, but I do find myself picking up on this trend in some shape or another every time I catch one of his flicks. But Nolan is more than just a one-trick pony, evident by his latest attempt to go a bit more straightforward with his subject matter, while also focusing on the dissection of a fairly layered character. That attempt is Oppenheimer, a historical biopic focused on Robert J. Oppenheimer, the man credited as the father of the nuclear weapon. His work with the Manhattan Project was pivotal for the ending of World War II, but the lasting implications of his work have long been a debated topic. This isn't Nolan's first rodeo into historical nonfiction, but it is the most secular and investigative. Nolan manages to craft a film that somehow maintains his signature ambitious scope, while also primarily focusing on smaller, simpler moments. This creates one of the most unique films in his catalog, and dare I say it, one of his best. Oppenheimer unravels the gray-colored layers of its titular scientist, attempting to grapple with the figure's historical significance and his moral dilemmas. The 3-hour biopic manages to be tense, nail-biting, and often horrifying despite a rather straightforward, dialogue-heavy approach to the story. Championed by an all-star ensemble cast and collaborated by true technical wizards, The film is a visual and auditory masterclass that gives depth to one of history's often forgotten figureheads and an uncomfortably bleak look into the moment that changed modern war and the world forever. The film is told in a fractured fashion, spanning Oppenheimer's early years all the way to post-World War II. We see his impact on quantum mechanics in the US, the development of the atomic bomb, the Trinity test, the dropping of said bomb, and the attempts to disparage the scientist after he expresses regret. The time jumps can be a tad confusing at times, especially with a side plot involving Lewis Strauss attempting to become Secretary of Commerce, but I think the film does a solid job weaving these different timelines in ways that narratively make sense. Like I said, it's perhaps Nolan's most straightforward film to date that doesn't involve a guy in a bat suit. It does demand some attention to understand how all of these instances ultimately connect, but the film itself is so engrossing that I didn't have too much of a problem with it. Cillian Murphy's take on the bomb builder is surprisingly complex and unsurprisingly fantastic. He manages to be a commanding on-screen presence despite being a relatively reserved character. Murphy manages to convey a genuine sense of dread and regret, something that visibly and slowly washes over the character more and more as he reaches his inevitable end. Yet he's not really a character you root for, but not one you find easy to outright despise. There's genius in his methods, but also a weakness as well, unable to definitively understand what he believes in. Is he a glutton for self-loathing, or someone who simply could not understand the ramifications of where he was heading? I'm still not entirely sure, but I'm not sure the film fully knows either. There's still a bit of ambiguity when it comes to Oppenheimer's morality that I think I can be satisfied with being unanswered. Regardless, Murphy captures all of the uncertainty, regret, and decay that comes with developing a killing machine, crafting a character that is defined by his greatness as much as his weakness. Supporting Murphy is a large ensemble cast that occasionally only occupies mere minutes out of the runtime, yet there are several pivotal performances worth mentioning. Robert Downey Jr. as Lewis Strauss has got to be a revelation for the actor, who I think a lot of people have just assumed is Tony Stark all the time. Strauss's looming presence over the story is constantly felt despite his actions taking place well after the most exciting parts of the story. There's a growing underlying toxicity to the character that, once it reaches its boiling point, proves how fantastic of an actor RDJ is. Emily Blunt as Catherine, Oppenheimer's wife, was someone I would have liked a little more depth from, yet she becomes a scene stealer at the tail end of the film. She embodies the primal strength to survive Oppenheimer himself comes to sorely lack, managing to wrestle her own demons to fight for the dying respect of her husband, which in turn affects her own respect. Peppering the film are strong supporting roles from the likes of Matt Damon, Florence Pugh, Benny Safdie, and Tom Conti, as well as a few surprising cameos and one-off appearances. I had no idea Gary Oldman was in this film, but his 2 minutes of screen time are just as great as you would expect. If there's one thing you can count on in a Nolan film, it's technical proficiency, and there's absolutely no shortage of it here. Like in Dunkirk, Nolan has an impressive eye for historical detail, managing to capture astute authenticity when recreating some of the film's most iconic moments, like the Trinity test. Despite the film taking place mostly in a desert or a cramped interrogation room, Nolan manages to still bring his trademark sense of scale to perhaps his most contained and claustrophobic film to date. The cinematography is striking at times, amplified by an impressive devotion to practicality, especially with the sprinkling of explosions and particles often seen throughout the film. As far as I know, these were all done practically, no CGI, employing a variety of techniques like forced perspective to simulate the splicing of atoms and a harrowing giant explosion. The film is mostly in color, but there are a few sequences shot in black and white, which I think helps split the film into scenes seen as subjective in color and factual in black and white. It's an interesting use of this style that I think drives home the fact that we're often along for the ride in Oppenheimer's perspective, relying on him as the narrator to get his side of the story. For a film mostly involving people talking, I thought the pacing was done exceptionally well for the most part. The pacing does buckle under the weight of the lengthy runtime, particularly near the tail end of the film, yet the editing remains so engaging throughout that I never felt bored when the film leans towards bureaucratic bickering over big explosions. The fact that he was able to make something like the Trinity test, an event where we obviously know what's going to happen, so tense and so nail-biting that it's a testament to Nolan's attentive pacing. It's not always a straightforward presentation either, as Nolan injects horror-like elements into a few scenes that play with blinding lights, deafening silence, and loud, abrasive noises. These scenes are genuinely unnerving, attempting to materialize the guilt-ridden psyche of the titular character in a way that alienates him from reality. As to be expected with Nolan's films, It's a loud one, especially if you're catching it in IMAX. Yet I regret to report that, like Tenet, there's a lot of poor mixing between Ludwig Göransson's incredible score and the film's dialogue. Especially with such a quiet main character, there were definitely a few scenes where what was being said was lost on me because of the audio mixing. I don't think it's nearly as bad as Tenet, but I do have to wonder how this happened twice. The film makes the decision to refrain from showing the act of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the effects it has on the Japanese people, which a few people have been pretty vocal about. I actually think this was a good decision in the long run for a few reasons. For starters, there are plenty of stories about this told by Japanese directors, who will obviously have the most insight into this absolutely horrible moment in human history. If you want more from the victim's perspective, there's plenty of films to choose from. There's Grave of the Fireflies, or if you want something a little bit more abstract, House is a unique allegory for the nuclear bombings. Hell, Godzilla's whole existence was based on the fear of nuclear war. You can't really say these voices haven't been highlighted, at least outside of America. You just need to look in the right places. So now you could be wondering why you should care about a film centered around the making of the weapon rather than those who suffer by it. Firstly, fair question. Secondly, the story had to be told this way for it to work because it's meant to highlight the divide, the separation of humanity these people had when building this weapon, which makes the film all the more horrifying. The fact that one of Japan's cities was spared simply because an American general honeymooned there shows that these people were so far removed from seeing their targets as fellow humans. Whether or not the bomb was the right decision in the long run is still debatable, but it's interesting to see how someone like Oppenheimer would handle this kind of legacy. There's quite a few interpretations you can take away from this story, which I think is true to history. Christopher Nolan has potentially delivered one of his best here, melding historical biopic and political thriller genres to create a tense critique on not only the craftsmen behind the atomic bomb, but the nuclear age that spawned from it. The character work is absolutely an all-timer for Nolan, while the performances feel authentic, grounded, and full of depth. Gorgeously designed from both a visual and auditory perspective, Oppenheimer manages to stand above the cliches and pratfalls of the genre to deliver an introspective take on a huge turning point in history, dissecting the man behind it all. While its momentum doesn't always remain steadfast, the film is still highly engaging and incredibly somber to sit with. It really shows Nolan's progression as a director while still holding on to what makes his work so appealing to begin with. Maybe this is the one that will finally make Nolan say, "I am become nominee, winner of Oscars." For my rating, I'm giving this film 4 cyanide apples out of 5. All right, 1 down, 1 left to go. Let's go ahead and reset and slip into something a little bit more appropriate. All right, next up is Barbie. For the cocktail, may I present to you the Barbie Malibu Dreamsicle. For this drink, I wanted to capture the aesthetic of Barbie Land, specifically Ken's job, beach. Just beach. The drink is sweet and tropical, combining the flavors of pineapple, coconut, and strawberry into a delightful summer drink that, if anything, may quiet those thoughts of dying for a little while, or amplify them. Anyway, let's dive right in and start beaching off. All right, go ahead and grab your shaker. We're gonna first be starting off with some fresh squeezed lime juice. You're gonna be doing 1/2 ounce. Next up, we're gonna be adding some homemade strawberry syrup. If you wanna make this at home, it's basically the same way you would make a normal homemade simple syrup, 1 part sugar, 1 part water. But I also added about 1 cup to 1.5 cups of chopped strawberries. And you're gonna be doing 1 ounce of the syrup. Next up, to build up the body, we're gonna be using some coconut milk, and you're gonna be using 1 ounce. Now for our alcohol, we're gonna be adding a little bit of citrus thanks to some orange liqueur. You're gonna be doing 3/4 ounces. And then for our base spirit, it wouldn't be a Barbie Malibu Dreamsicle if we didn't have Malibu rum. And I'm specifically gonna be using the pineapple version. And of course, you don't have to use specifically Malibu brand rum, but you're at least going to want the pineapple rum. And you're gonna be doing 1.5 ounces. All right, let's get ice in our shaker and shake to chill. The drink is done. All we need is a garnish. I'm gonna go ahead and garnish it with a strawberry. And there you go. Now you have Barbie's Malibu Dreamsicle. It isn't really much of a surprise that all of these flavors work very well together. The coconut, the strawberry, the pineapple, the faint hint of citrus. Very approachable, perfect for summer, perfect for the beach, and a nice shade of pink that definitely reminds me of Barbie, and a little bit of Pepto-Bismol, but it tastes great. Now that we have our second drink, let's get into the review of Barbie. You would think that a movie about one of the biggest toy brands of all time would be an obvious cash grab. Make the movie to showcase toys, get kids to buy toys. It's a tried and true formula that was the backbone of 80s and 90s animated shows, and you can still find merchandise being a huge selling point for a lot of shows and movies today. But every now and then, someone tries to go beyond the simplicity of the IP and turn it into something special. Look at the Lego Movie. This could have been a generic by-the-numbers story that does nothing interesting with the IP and only exists to sell products. Well, they actually did make that. It's called the Playmobil Movie. Barbie could have very easily fallen down that hole, but who would have thought having a director with an interesting vision would prevent that? Greta Gerwig has been killing it over the past few years, seamlessly transitioning from low-budget indie darling to a substantial voice in Hollywood. Her A24 film Lady Bird pushed her a bit more into the public eye, while her follow-up adaptation of Little Women really started to get her name out there. A lot of Gerwig's work is very personal, usually pertaining to coming of age and womanhood, so honestly she sounded like a great fit. In 2021 she signed on with husband and writer of Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted, Noah Baumbach, to write the story and while also directing herself. She was allegedly given complete creative freedom from both Warner Brothers and Mattel, which, if you've seen the movie, that's more than apparent. Barbie is one of those films that could have gone so wrong yet gets so much right. The film is both honorable and critical of the doll's legacy, contextualizing the brand's impact on society and modern values. It's highly satirical, both in ways that I thought did and didn't work, while being visually stunning thanks to an admirable attention to detail when it comes to crafting the world of Barbie in all of its plastic glory. The cast is top-notch, and the script is one of the funniest I've seen this year, and while I think the story occasionally misses the mark on its commentary, I still consider this a best-case scenario given Hollywood's track record. Not far away from the real world exists Barbie Land, a blindingly pink matriarchal society inhabited by an assortment of Barbies of all shapes, sizes, backgrounds, and careers. But one day, a stereotypical Barbie begins to have an existential crisis over her own existence, leading her to journey to the real world in order to find the truth behind these intrusive thoughts. This leads her down a path of self-realization that not only picks apart womanhood, but also what it means to be human. Greta Gerwig really lays bare her thoughts and feelings on women's place in the world under a patriarchal society, to a point where I have to reiterate that I cannot believe this was okayed by Warner Brothers and Mattel. And I mean that in a good way. This is such a big, weird swing for a modern blockbuster to take, but it benefits all the more from it. At times it's as simple as a fish out of water comedy, while other times it's incredibly meta, breaking the fourth wall while playing with the boundaries of conventional storytelling. It attempts to dissect not only the modern world, but also Barbie as an icon, and even Mattel as a company. There's quite a few dissections of gender and patriarchy, which some of you may roll your eyes at, but I think the film mostly covers these themes pretty well. A lot of people have walked away thinking this is an anti-men film, and I really feel like that's just a misread of the satire. There's plenty of jokes at men's expense, but it also addresses issues that men themselves face in our society, like an expectation to meet certain masculine standards. And it may surprise you that it even addresses issues in how women can treat men in society, which always seem to be suspiciously glossed over in other reviews I've read. At the end of the day, it's satire. Is it good satire? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. I do want to gush over the cast for a bit, because I think everyone here is phenomenal. I don't think you could ask for a better representation of classic Barbie than Margot Robbie, an actor who has been killing it for a while now. Robbie manages to bring the bubbly joy expected from the character while also tapping into some surprisingly heavy existentialism. Her Barbie carries an unsureness about her place in both Barbie Land and the real world, struggling to find her own identity outside of the mass-produced image sold to children. Her character gets a lot deeper than I anticipated, and Robbie's performance remains entertaining as well as endearing through her odyssey. Now, I hate to rob a film about girl power by saying a man stole a show, but come on. Ryan Gosling as Ken? One of the most perfect casting decisions of all time. If you're unfamiliar with Gosling's comedic chops, then 1, go watch The Nice Guys, and 2, buckle up because he is a gut buster. Gosling's goofy, impressionable Ken is a riot every time he's on screen. Sometimes he doesn't even have to talk, just the way he occupies space can be equally as funny. But he's more than just a punchline, as Ken has one of the more layered character arcs when it comes to the ensemble. It ties into the idea of those expected pressures of being a man, having to act a certain way and trying to control everything just because that's how it's been for centuries. His journey is a surprising one and damn hilarious if I do say so myself. The supporting cast, ranging from variations on Barbie and Ken, are also a delight. with some of these standouts for me being Issa Rae, Kate McKinnon, and Kingsley Ben-Adir, while American Ferrera, Rhea Perlman, and Will Ferrell all have some impactful moments as characters residing in the real world. Perhaps one of my favorite aspects of the film is the set design, specifically with the Barbie land architecture and world. The crew did a phenomenal job replicating the plastic feel of the Barbie playsets, while the world around them has the kind of bright, hokey charm to it that I was looking for. And yeah, it's very pink. So pink that it actually caused a national shortage of pink paint for a short while. There's also a lot of cutouts for backgrounds and environments that give some of the sets a more theatrical feel, which reminded me a lot of this year's Beau is Afraid. The human world is expectedly not as interesting to look at, so I did find myself yearning to return to Barbie Land more often than not. Yet there's still some silly little designs I found to be fun, like the Mattel office. The soundtrack was also another highlight, featuring a great mix of modern pop and hip-hop, along with a surprising lack of Barbie Girl by Aqua. I think we hear it for like 5 seconds at one point, so the team must have thought that fruit hung a little bit too low. The rest of the film's soundtrack is a lot of fun and integrated pretty well, with some standouts being a narrating open track that gives us the rundown on Barbie and her day by Lizzo. Then of course there's what I predict to be the future Oscar winner for Best Original Song, I'm Just Ken, performed by Ryan Gosling. A song that lets us enter the tormented and downtrodden soul of Ken, an undeniable earworm that also accompanies a pretty great beach dance battle. As for the script, this is where I harbor some praise as well as some criticism. I can confidently say this is probably the funniest movie I've seen this year, due in part to the mix of solid comedic writing and a cast that knows how to deliver it. Not every joke lands, but there's a great assortment of one-liners, visual gags, and a hint of slapstick. While the dialogue is often funny, I do find it to be a bit overwritten at times. There's a trend of characters that will have long-winded or tightly worded responses, and that's supposed to be the joke, but I've never really been a fan of that kind of writing. Something like, oh, I'm really feeling the encroaching oblivion spawned by the patriarchal change which tie us down. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like being matter-of-fact is the punchline, and it just doesn't do it for me. I also thought the writing at times could be a bit heavy-handed with its themes, being as direct as possible with not a ton of nuance. It can really make its feminist approach feel kind of shallow at times when you have to resort to buzzwords and slogans in place of meaningful dialogue, at least to me. At the end of the day, I think the story is trying to cover a bit too much ground and isn't entirely sure where it stands on some issues. Is this an anti-Mattel film despite the fact that it was developed under the watchful eye of the brand? I'm not so sure. It all gets very complex while also being quite oversimplified. I still had a fun time, but I didn't leave the film pondering on what it had to say more than what was probably intended. Even with these issues, Barbie is still a best case scenario final product when it comes to merchandise getting its own feature. The cast is great, the story is a ton of fun, and the designs and presentations are exemplary. I don't think it's the woke liberal feminist hit piece some people have labeled it, even if it does occasionally succumb to the pratfalls that come with being chronically online. It's hardly offensive, so put the matches away and take your dolls out of the trash can, you'll be fine. For my rating, I'm giving this film 3.5 Birkenstocks out of 5. And there we go. That is my thoughts on Barbenheimer. If you made it to the end, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I once again want to give a big shout out to everyone that has helped the channel reach 500 subscribers. I'm still blown away by the support the channel continues to get, and I can't thank you enough if you've been sticking around for a while. 500 used to be a pretty daunting number, but I think 1,000 is more than obtainable now, and who knows how high we can go from there. If you are new to the channel and you want to see more movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to continue helping support the channel, and also be sure to check out my website, martinishot.blog. Until next time, thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Live deliciously, but please remember to drink responsibly.